Hey guys, my name is Adrian, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be doing a bit of a list for you, and this is going to be books or series that I think are underhyped. Now that might be that I don't think enough people talk about them. It might be that I think they're underrated in terms of particularly what Goodreads says about them. So these are going to be sci-fi and fantasy series where I feel like people are really sleeping on them, whether that's because they're not talked about or they're not rated very well. Some of these you probably will have heard of, maybe not. I think a lot of them you might not have done, depending on how well versed you are in the speculative fiction genres. So let's jump in with my first and my only science fiction recommendation here on the underhyped books, and that is the Revelation Space Trilogy by Alastair Reynolds over here. There it is. This is a series I read a long time ago. I read this when I was a teenager. It has been a long time, but I do remember that I really enjoyed it. It was a series that I found particularly interesting. I wasn't big into sci-fi at that point. I much preferred fantasy, but this series has stuck with me quite a little bit. I think it's particularly interesting in how it develops. I think the development of the plot and the characters are interesting, and I do think that Alastair Reynolds does a really good job expanding out from what felt like a first book that almost had its own arc and didn't need necessarily any follow-ups, but he did an incredibly good job in book 2 of making it make sense as a trilogy. I don't know if it was written to be a trilogy or if it was written to be a standalone book, but Alastair Reynolds does a very good job making that work, and I think he did that very well. I think the technology and the sci-fi elements of this are particularly interesting. The ships, I remember, stick with me as a particularly strong part. They almost felt like they had their own personality in some ways. I mean, I really enjoyed that. I thought the ships were a very interesting part of this series, along with the different humans or humanoid races. So there's these space pigs that you get on some of these planets that I think are an interesting concept. They're very humanoid pigs, basically. As well as that, they have a particular sect of humanity who are all about technologically altering themselves, and I think that is explored interestingly as well. I have heard literally nobody talk about this series. I read it as a teenager because my mum bought it, the first one of them, for me for Christmas once, and I loved it, and I'm surprised that I don't hear anyone else talking about this series. So if you're looking for a slightly older sci-fi series to dig into, maybe read up on this one, see if it's something you might enjoy. So it's Revelation Space, followed by Redemption Arc, and then Absolution Gap. See, it's been such a long time I can't even remember the name of them. But yeah, absolutely worth a look into if you want a sci-fi rec. After that, let's jump straight into my fantasy recommendations for this as well. So first up on my fantasy recommendations list, this is going to be one that is talked about a little bit in the corner of BookTube I'm a part of. I know that Klaus, the Contradictorian, loves this series as well as me. I know that Alan over at the Library of Alexandria absolutely adores this series as well. But if you look at the ratings, especially for book 1 on Goodreads, it is shocking how low it is. It is at 3.6 or something. It's just ridiculous. And this is The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. This is possibly the best complete series I've read this year, or at least it's very close, very close. I really loved The Long Price Quartet. So this starts with A Shadow in Summer, followed by A Betrayal in Winter, An Autumn War, and then The Price of Spring. If you want to know more about this series, maybe go and check out my video on it. It was one of my very early videos, so excuse the quality of it. But this is essentially a Eastern-inspired fantasy setting where we have this group of city-states known as the Kayem, who have access to a particular form of magic, and this is essentially the ability of the poets of the society to speak concepts into being, into physical form, essentially to manifest them. So the first of these we meet is called Seedless. His full name is Removing the Part That Continues, and he has the ability to make the seeds fall out of things. Now this doesn't sound particularly devastating or necessarily interesting, but there is very interesting uses that Daniel Abraham has for these, and these are called Ondot, these creatures, these manifest beings. It is a very slow series. It does not move fast. There's not a whole bunch of action that's happening, particularly at the start. I do think if you enjoy A Shadow in Summer, you should continue because the series only gets better, and those later books absolutely show the setup and the work that we have built into book 1 as well. So absolutely give this a go. I cannot recommend The Long Price Quartet enough. It is thoughtful, it is thought-provoking, it is slow often, but there is some punch, especially towards the end. And in terms of character arcs, I think this does an incredibly good job in 4 short books to give you such wonderful arcs and changes in characters as they progress, as the world around them changes and they have to deal with that. So yeah, particularly Ota, who we meet in the prologue, is my absolute boy. I love Ota, and as we see him proceeding through the series as well, let alone so many of the other characters who are just really, really, really amazing characters. Next up is a series that I want to recommend that is underhyped. I don't hear anyone talk about it really. The only person I've ever heard talk about it is Petrick. So go check out Petrick's channel. And this is the Paternus Trilogy by Dirk Ashton. This trilogy is an urban fantasy trilogy. So the first book is quite short in comparison to the other two. It is got a very, almost a YA feel. It's written very interestingly. It's very head hoppy. It likes jumping from one character to another, to another, to another. It's sort of third person omniscient almost. I almost did like a Dune style, or a Dune style if we're being English about it. And yeah, I really liked it. I think the first book was okay. But then Dirk Ashton does an incredible job building his world out from there. He manages to take so many myths and religious stories from our world and manages to build them into his world building, into his magic. It's incredibly clever in that. If you don't like this third person omniscient sort of head hopping style, it might not be for you. It's also written in the present tense, which is quite interesting as well, not something I'm massively used to. So yeah, if you want to read a series where the world building is really well done and it pulls in all these ideas from different mythologies and religions from around the world, whether that be Norse mythology, Hindu religion, whether that be all kinds of stuff from all over the world, Anglo-Saxon historical myths, even Christian beliefs, it pulls in all kinds of different things and does it incredibly well. Even the sort of Haitian beliefs. There's a whole bunch of different belief systems and mythologies and histories that are brought together in this and done incredibly well. It is unique in its world building and unique in its magic system and the way it's styled, and I think that's really interesting. And I will say that even when there are this present tense that I didn't necessarily love and the head hopping, which I didn't love, I think it all makes sense when you get to the end, and I think that's done incredibly, incredibly well. I love the way Dirk Ashton ended this series. For me, I think the first book was a 3.5 and the last book was a 4.5, and it sort of graduated through in this series. Done very, very well. So if you're interested in that, absolutely give that a go. Like I said, I've only seen Petrick talk about it, so if that sounds interesting to you, go have a read up, go listen to Petrick talk about it and see what you think. My last proper sort of epic fantasy rec is going to be Masters and Mages, and this is by Miles Cameron. Now, Miles Cameron is well known under his other pen name, I think Christian Cameron, for his historical fiction. As well as that, he is well known for, I think it's called Traitor Sun Cycle as well. So he's well known for a bunch of different things. But as Miles Cameron, he has written the Master and Mages trilogy. And for me, I didn't absolutely love this series, but I think it is good. And I think it's good enough that I'm surprised by how little it's talked about. So in lots of ways, the first book reminded me of a slightly more pragmatic Name of the Wind. So it's a little bit less flowery, it's not as beautiful in prose, but it felt like a little bit like that. We're following one person, a young man, as he deals with growing up, developing into a man, and dealing with his education as well. And I definitely enjoyed that. I thought that was done pretty well in a very different style to Name of the Wind, but done relatively well and really enjoyed. Book 2, Dark Forge, lost me a little bit. I didn't love it quite as much, but Bright Steel, the last book, I think was really, really strong and really good. And the first book is called Cold Iron. And yeah, I think this is the kind of series that it's absolutely worth a go. If you don't love the first book, then it's maybe not going to grab you moving forwards. But if you do like that first book, it's definitely worth a continue. A series that I did enjoy this year, although it didn't absolutely blow my socks off. I am surprised by how few people are talking about it. And in many ways, whenever I hear Miles Cameron mentioned, it's not for this series. So yeah, very interesting. Maybe worth a go if it is something that sounds appealing to you. If you want Name of the Wind, but just tone down a little bit on the prose, maybe. And my last recommendation for you, this is going to be a humorous recommendation. This is going to be called Warlock Homes by G.S. Denning. I've read the first couple of books in this series, so A Study in Brimstone and The Hellhound of the Baskervilles. Now, as the name may suggest, this is a humorous parody on Sherlock Holmes, where Sherlock is actually a warlock. And he communes with spirits and he has these magical powers. And we are still following Watson, Dr. John Watson. And he, in this setup, is the detective genius. He is the one who can put everything together, who works out how things work. But whereas Warlock has the magical powers to work out what he needs to in that way and in that fashion. For me, this is a very, very funny series. Both the books have a longer sort of novella length story in, and then a good few short stories. I think both of them have about 5 short stories in as well. Definitely enjoyable. I really like where G.S. Denning is going with this. I will definitely be picking up the next few as well. I think there's maybe 3 more out. And I was amazed at how closely, particularly at the start, he manages to follow the Sherlock Holmes stories. Now that sounds weird considering, but it's very interesting how he manages to do that. Even with characters like Lestrade and Grogson, just done very, very well. If you want a humorous take on Sherlock Holmes in the fantastical setting, this is absolutely something you should be looking at reading. It is a bit absurd. It is just a little bit out there. It is absurdist, and yeah, in lots of ways that happens. But it is funny, and if you want a fun, enjoyable palate cleanser, seriously give these a go. I cannot recommend them highly enough. If you are a Sherlock Holmes fan, or if you have any nostalgia at all for Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes and you love fantasy, seriously give these a go. Very funny, very enjoyable. Big recommend from me. So there we go. There are my 5 series that I think are underhyped or underrated, that I don't see talked about enough, or people don't love as much as I think they should. I hope that's been interesting to you, and if you did enjoy it, don't forget to click like, subscribe if you'd like to, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.